Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 574 Sports Report. I'm your host, Drew Clawater, and it's just me today. Unfortunately, John Overmeyer not able to join today. He was hoping to be able to join. He has other obligations, baseball today. Today, the day we're recording, we had some weather come through the area. He wasn't sure if he was going to be able to join. Then he thought he was, and then they called him and said, "Nope, we're doing the game tonight." So he has other obligations. So you just get me tonight. So we are talking the NLC Conference along with Logansport Berries. We got a full slate today. First thing, I want to thank our sponsors, May Oberfell Lorber Attorneys at Law, Carge Chiropractic and Wellness Center, Barnaby's on Jefferson, Digsy Dogs and Grill, like Leitner Door, along with our new sponsor, the Logansport High School class of 1962. We want to thank all of them for sponsoring this podcast, helping us be able to do this. Now, I know the last podcast was super long. The three of us, me, Kenny, and John, when we get together, we get to talking. Don't want to make it too long. We have 8 teams in the NLC plus Logansport. But I do want to remind everyone before we get started that we do have our live podcast from Digsy Dogs and Grill August 8th. That's a Saturday. We are going to have our big schedule reveal for broadcast sport, what me and John are going to do this fall. We are going to have Kenny Peterson on. We're going to talk football. We have media day for some teams earlier in the day. We're still trying to get down when we're doing it. We're thinking early afternoon-ish. So we will let you know when we're doing that. Look on Twitter, 574 Sports, Facebook, the 574 Sports Report. I will put it out everywhere. John will put it out. So we will get a time down. If you want to come out, we'd love to hear from you guys. Talk football, obviously. Practice is about to get ready to start. We're in late July, about to start August, and kickoff is August 21st, so it's right around the corner, folks. It is going to be a great season with you guys. We're looking forward to Saturday. So, with that being said, let's get into the NLC Conference. This conference last year was led by 2 teams, and then you kind of had your next tier teams and then your bottom tier. Mishawaka won the conference at 7-0, 10-2 overall. Concord came in second, 6-1 in conference, 11-2 overall. You had Warsaw at 5-2 in conference, 6-4 overall. Plymouth was fifth, 3-4 in conference, 4-7 overall. Northridge was sixth at 2-5 in conference, 3-8 overall. Goshen was seventh, 1-6 in conference, 2-8 overall. Wawasee was last, 0-7 in conference, 1-9 overall. Your season leaders on the season, you had Concord's Bo Brunner as the passing leader, 2,004 yards. Rushing yards, you had Charisse Brevard from Concord with 1,439 yards. Really high-powered offense last year for the Concord Minutemen. Receiving yards, you had Spencer Elliott of Goshen with 876 yards. Total touchdowns, Charisse Brevard from Concord with 30. Total tackles, you had Colt Granberg from Northridge with 136 tackles. You had Ken Clemente from Mishawaka lead the way with 5 sacks. And then you had 7 different players tied with 2 interceptions, according to the stat overview I found of the NLC. So that was kind of a look at the NLC conference last year, along with the season leaders. We're just going to get right into our conference champion last year, the Mishawaka Cavemen. As I just said, they were 10-2 overall, 7-0 in conference. They scored 377 points, averaged about 31.4 points per game. They gave up 193 points, averaged about 16.1 points per game given up. You look at last year's schedule, 10-2 overall, really good schedule for them. They beat Mishawaka Marion 35-7 before they lost a really tough game to Penn 28-22. They were up in that game before Penn staged a fourth quarter comeback, I do believe. They beat Concord early in the season 38-34 in a barn burner. They then just coasted the rest of the way. 26-25 hard-fought win over Northridge, 59-0 over Goshen, 35-20 over Northridge, 42-21 over Warsaw, 28-0 over Plymouth, 36-14 over Wawasee to end the regular season. Beat Northwood in the first round of sectionals 28-14. Beat Plymouth 21-17 before losing to St. Joe 13-7 in the sectional championship. You look at this season for the Cavemen, they're at Mishawaka Marion. They then host Penn in week 2, August 28th. That's going to be a great game. The backyard brawl, no matter what, it's going to be a good game. And you always get it early in the season, so teams are still figuring themselves out. Then they also host Plymouth to start conference play. They're at Warsaw, host Northwood, at Concord, the new Concord field. They host Northridge. They then end the season at Goshen and at Wawasee. So really, they get Penn at home, which is good. They get Northwood at home, which is good. At Concord, at Warsaw. The Warsaw game is always going to be tough. As Kenny said last week, Bart ball is never, to be undermined or really overlooked. So that's always going to be tough. But they have a decent home away split, I would say. But that Penn game at home is definitely one you always want to get at home. Penn, Mishawaka, whatever. It's always going to be a well-attended game for sure. Now we'll look at some season stats from last season. Mishawaka, obviously not a heavy passing team. They run the ball, and they run it a lot. So passing-wise, Snyder led the way, 13-22, 274 yards, 59% completion rating, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Like I said, they don't run the ball that much at all. Or they don't throw the ball that much at all. They run the ball all the time. So rushing-wise, Kay O'Neill led the way with 221 carries, 1,366 yards, 6.2 yards per carry, 124.2 yards per game, and 17 touchdowns. Now, he led the way in carries. Snyder led the way in yards. He had 165 carries, but he had 1,409 yards, 8.56 yards per carry, and 128 yards per game with 21 touchdowns. That backfield was dynamic for Warsaw all year, for Concord. Wow. Third time's a charm. That backfield was dynamic for Mishawaka. There we go. All year long. And they were able to put up points all throughout the season. Receiving wise, obviously, if they don't throw the ball much, not a lot of receptions to be had. Hanley had 7 receptions for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. Francis had 2 receptions for 39 yards. We flip it over to the defense. Putz had 79 solo tackles, 44 assisted tackles for 123 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss. Ginter had 57 solo tackles, 21 assisted tackles, 78 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss. Leaders in tackles for loss, you had a 3-way tie at the top with Clemente and I'm sorry I'm going to mispronounce this, Almire Garcia, and Putz all had 7 tackles for loss. Clemente had 5 sacks. Putz had 2.5 sacks. Picadio Ramirez and Hahn both had 2 interceptions. We take a look at team overall stats. 14 to 23 passing for 279 yards, 4 touchdowns. Sooners. I think there was one completion. Yeah, one total completion for 5 yards that wasn't from Snyder. Running wise, they carried it 496 times for 3,525 yards, averaged 7.1 yards per carry, 320 yards per game with 44 touchdowns. Insane offense. We knew that's what Mishawaka wants to do. They want to run the ball. They sure did last year. They had 760 total tackles. Now, I know that sounds like a lot. 514 solo tackles, 246 assisted, equals 760. So that's where you kind of get the insane tackle numbers, is with the solo plus assisted. But they did have 40 tackles for loss on the season. 13 sacks, 4 interceptions, 9 fumble recoveries. So really good year for Mishawaka. But you know what? With how good their year was, I think this year is going to be better for them. Because you look at what they lose, they do lose a good bit on defense, don't get me wrong. But their offense, they bring back their quarterback, which passing-wise doesn't mean anything, really. He had 22 completion, or 22 attempts passing. He had 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But you bring back your leading ball carrier, and not only that, you bring back your leading carries carrier. You bring back your backfield in Snyder and O'Neal. So you're bringing back 77% of your total carries. You're losing 65 carries on the season. You're losing 536 yards and 3 touchdowns. So you're losing 13% of your carries, 15% of your rushing yards, and 7% of your rushing touchdowns. You're still bringing back almost 3,000 total rushing yards. And that's just another year in the weight room, in the scheme, getting things together. You're not going to change. Like Warsaw, you're not going to change much because of the offense they run. But you're getting things another year in the weight room. Now, this is where, and me and Kenny talked about this off air. I don't think we talked about it on your air. And I understand this may be a little biased as a former offensive and defensive lineman myself, but this is where having no stats or anything for offensive line really hurts, because Mishawaka is bringing back all this returning rushing yards. Now, they do lose every single reception stat because all their receivers are seniors, but you're bringing all this back offensively on the ground, and unless you have a good offensive line, it doesn't mean as much. Because imagine if they brought back all this talent in the backfield and they had a full junior offensive line last year. Now all of a sudden you have a full senior offensive line, another year in the weight room. This could be a very, very dangerous Mishawaka team come tournament time. And if you want to go back and listen to the NIC preview last year, they're in the same sectional with St. Joe. We talked about St. Joe last week. So that could be a very interesting game come tournament time, because, as I said, Mishawaka lost to St. Joe 13-7 in the sectional championship last year. So really, depending on the offensive line, this offense brings back 80% of its total yards and it brings back 80% of its total yards and brings back 78% of its total points. So they lose 889 out of 4,379 yards, and they lose 54 of 306 points. Insane numbers that Mishawaka is bringing back. Now, as I said, on the flip side, they do lose a good chunk on defense. They lose half their tackles, 379 out of 760. They do lose their top 3 tacklers. They lose half their tackles for loss, 20 of 40. They lose 58% of their total sacks, 7.5 out of 13. Not a lot of sacks, I understand that. They lose 2 of 4 interceptions. They lose 7 of 9 fumble recoveries. So as much as they bring back offensively, they lose just as much, if not more, on defense. So it'll be an interesting year for Mishawaka. They are set up to repeat as champions, and we'll go through all the teams. I'll give my predictions and all that, whatever you want to call it. But after doing all this research, Mishawaka is definitely set up to have a chance to go back to back in the conference. There's no if, ands, or buts about it. It's just offensively, they bring all this back in another year, and they're losing a lot defensively. But Keith Kinder has a lot coming back for this Mishawaka Caveman. So if you're a Mishawaka fan, you're obviously going to want to watch the Penn game come August 28th. That Concord game, September 25th at Concord, could be important. That Warsaw game at Warsaw, because you never want to overlook the Tigers. And then the Northwood game could be a sneaky game, but you get it at home. So big year coming for the Mishawaka Cavemen, in my opinion. Next up, we're going to talk about the Concord Minutemen. And as a Jimtown graduate, obviously not too far away from Concord, but they went 11-2 overall last year, 6-1 in conference. Obviously, their one loss was to Mishawaka early in the season, 38-34. Back and forth game there. They lost in semi-state, so this team went really far looking to get a state title. They just came up short against Maryville. They had 489 points scored on the season, averaged 37.6 points per game. Now, defensively, they did give up 313 points, 24 points per game. But when you have an offense like that, you can give up a little bit on defense. You look at last year's schedule. They start out with a huge win against Elkhart, 35-29. Again, if you go back to the NIC Conference preview from last week, I have Elkhart as a dark horse in the NIC Conference. Obviously, it starts out with Penn. There's no ifs, ands, or buts there, but Elkhart and St. Joe, 1-2 right there. Elkhart is my dark horse, so that's a big game coming up this year. But they beat Elkhart last year, 35-29. Beat my Jimmies 41-13 before they lost to Mishawaka 38-34, and then they just went on a run. Northridge 21-14, Warsaw 38-7, Northwood 44-34, Goshen 42-0, Wawasee 49-21, Plymouth 45-14 to end the regular season. They then beat Warsaw 45-28 in the sectionals, beat Fort Wayne Northside 34-29 in the sectional championship, beat Lafayette Jefferson 47-45 in the regional championship before losing to Maryville 41-14. But this team just went on a run, and we have to remember they did all this away from their home stadium. They're getting a brand new home field, a brand new Jake Field this upcoming season. So they played their games. I know they played some at Rice Field. I believe they played a couple at Mishawaka Stadium. And I know they had one game in Indy for their home game because the seniors weren't getting a true home game. So they made their game at Lucas Oil Stadium their senior night, I believe. And I mean, really cool experience for them, I'm sure. But they get a brand new stadium this year. They're unveiling it, obviously, August 21st when they host Elkhart. That's going to be a huge game just to start the season for them. Not that it's a conference game, obviously, but that's just a right out the gate, a tough opponent. 6A, they have a lot to prove, and we'll get through the stats and what they lost and everything, but I don't know what this Concord team is going to look like because they lose. I don't want to say they lose everything, but they kind of lose everything. But looking at this year's schedule, they host Elkhart in their first game at their new stadium. Back-to-back weeks, they're at Jimtown. Then they're at Wawasee to start conference play. They then host Goshen, at Northridge, host Mishawaka. That is going to be an interesting game. September 25th. Circle your calendars. They then go to Northwood, host Warsaw. Then they are at Plymouth to end the season October 16th. So not too bad home and away splits for Concord. You get Mishawaka and Warsaw at home. Unfortunately, you also get Elkhart at home, but conference play wise, you're at Northridge, at Northwood. Those are two tough places to play, no matter how each team is doing a conference game. So it's going to be an interesting year for the Minutemen for sure. But looking at last year's stats, passing wise, B. Brunner, as I said in the opening, he led the conference in passing yards. He was 150 of 213 for 2,004 yards, a whopping 70% completion rate. Insane. 154 yards a game, 14 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Brevard led the way with 206 carries, 1,439 yards, 7 yards per carry, 110 yards per game, and 29 touchdowns. That's why he led the conference not only in rushing, but also in total touchdowns. Second leading rusher was their quarterback in Brunner, 112 carries, 815 yards, 7.3 yards per carry, 62 yards a game, 14 touchdowns in the season. So that backfield was absolutely dynamic in Brunner and Brevard. I mean, you look rushing wise, they had 2,200 yards. Brunner had 2,000 yards through the air. So that backfield, rushing, receiving wise, and I didn't do the math with receiving because Brevard also led the team in receptions, 53 receptions, 484 yards, 1 touchdown. Gomez was the second leading receiver, 41 receptions, 635 yards, and 4 touchdowns. But that backfield was responsible for roughly, I would say, 2,700 yards, give or take, as well as 40 touchdowns on the season. So, very dynamic backfield in Brunner and Brevard for the Minutemen last year. Defensively, Gomez led the way in tackles, 80 solo, 34 assists, 114 total tackles, with 13 tackles for loss. Wyrich had 55 solo tackles, 42 assists, 97 total tackles, with 5 tackles for loss. Gomez led the way with 13 tackles for a loss, followed by Castaneda with 9. Gomez and Arnold led the way for the Minutemen with 3 sacks apiece. Brevard had 2 interceptions, and Brunner and Gunawan each had 1 interception on the season. So you look at team stats. Passing-wise, 151 out of 216 for 2,020 yards, 15 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. So there was 1 completion out of 3 attempts for 16 yards and a touchdown, plus an interception outside Brunner. Rushing-wise, they had 439 carries for 3,164 yards, 7.2 yards per carry, 243 yards per game, and 51 rushing touchdowns. So you do quick math here, 154 yards passing-wise for Brunner, 243 rushing yards. So Concord averaged about 399 yards per game, along with their 37, almost 38 points per game. Defensively, they had 581 solo tackles, 372 assisted tackles, 953 total tackles. Again, solo plus assisted. That's how you get the really big numbers. However, they did have 64 tackles for a loss, so they wreaked havoc in the backfield. Along with the 64 tackles for a loss, 16 and a half sacks, 4 interceptions, and 10 fumble recoveries. Here is where the tides turn as we flip from last year to this year. Concord graduates both Brunner and Brevard, and then they also graduate Gomez, their leader in defense. So what does that mean? Well, they lose 99% of their passes, 213 out of 216. They lose 2,004 yards out of their 2,020 yards, 99%, and 14 to 15 touchdowns. So that's why I made note of 3 passes for 16 yards and a touchdown is what Concord brings back passing-wise. Rushing-wise, it gets a little better, not much. They bring back, or they lose 393 of 439 carries, so 90% of carries graduate. They lose 2,858 yards out of 3,164 yards, 90%. And then they lose 48 of 51 touchdowns, or 94% of their touchdowns. And I know you're kind of thinking, geez, they lost their full backfield. It can't get much worse. You're right, it can't get much worse. It gets a little better. They lose 109 receptions out of 151, so they lose 72% of their receptions. They lose 1,375 of 2018 receiving yards, so they only lose 68% of their receiving yards. And then they only lose 9 of 14 receiving touchdowns, or 64%. So it gets a little better. They do bring back some receiving threats, but overall, they lose 5,208 yards out of 6,257, or 83% of their total yards. And then they lose 348 of 396, or 88% of their points. And that's just on the offensive side. So they lose everything offensively last year that led them to that semi-state run. And I kind of go back to 2 previews ago, the INSC. This senior class for Concord built up through 4 years, like for Knox and Mr. Football. That senior class built up for 4 years. They made a run. Both teams make it to semi-state, come up 1 game short of playing in Lucas Oil Stadium, they lose their whole senior class, and it just kind of decimates their offense. It'll be interesting to see what they bring back, what they have, and what Coach Craig Kohler can do this upcoming year. But to start with Elkhart, a brand new stadium, all that electric atmosphere coming back, it is definitely an uphill battle for the offense of the Concord Minutemen. And it gets a little better, not much on the defensive side. They lose 581 of 953 tackles. So 61% of their tackles, 7 of their top 10 tacklers are gone in graduation. 40 of 64 tackles for loss, or 63%. 9.5 of 16.5, 57% of total sacks. They lose 3 of 4 interceptions, 7 of 10 fumble recoveries. It's definitely going to be an uphill battle for Concord this year, with losing Brunner, Brevard, Gomez. They bring back Wyrich and Thompson, who I know I talked about Wyrich a little bit. He was their second leading tackler, but to lose your leading tackler, your leading tackles for loss, your leading sack person, all in Gomez, it's not as hurtful as that offense because you lost everything on offense. But I mean, you're losing so much on defense as well. It is definitely going to be an uphill battle for the Concord Minutemen this year. Now, before we go on to our next couple teams, we're going to take a quick break and be right back here on the 574 Sports Report.
May Oberfell-Lorber is dedicated to advising you on a broad range of legal matters focused on positive outcomes, finding quick and effective resolutions to your legal disputes, whether it's estate planning, real estate, personal injuries, business transactions, employment issues, or litigation. May Oberfell-Lorber. They're your neighbors, your friends, your local team with offices in Mishawaka and Southwest Michigan with over 150 years experience. May Oberfell-Lorber. Accessible, experienced, versatile. Visit maylorber.com. May Oberfell-Lorber.
Are you in need for a new door for your house garage? The place to buy is Leckleitner Door of Elkhart. Leckleitner Door has been in business since 1979, specializing in sales, installation, and service of a variety of doors including overhead doors, electric operators, entry doors, fire doors, and more. Their service techs are trained to repair most makes and models of doors, operators, and hardware. They will help you every step of the way with a professional sales and service staff that will meet your every need. Leckleitner or call at 574-295-6311. Leckleitner Door. We open all the right doors.
And we are back at the 574 Sports Report. Nice little calming music here. I'm your host, Drew Clauder. As we get ready to get into our next 3 teams, I know we usually go 2 teams at a time before we take, commercial breaks, but our next team is going to be the Warsaw Tigers, and unfortunately, I could not find any stats for Warsaw. So we're just going to talk about them a little bit, and then we'll get into the Northwood Panthers as well as the Plymouth Pilgrims before we take our next break for our commercial sponsors. And then we'll go from there, just kind of like last week in the NIC preview. So first team we're going to talk about, as I said, the Warsaw Tigers. They're coming in from last season 6-4 overall, 5-2 in conference. They lost in sectionals last year. They gave up 290 points scored, they scored 290 points, averaged 29 points per game, and then they gave up 237, 23 points per game. Last year, they started the year out with a 38-30 win against Fort Wayne Snyder before dropping a tough game against Warren Central 28-14. They then would go on to win against Goshen 37-7. They would beat Wawasee 41-7 before losing to Concord 38-7. They would then beat Plymouth 42-14, lose to Mishawaka 42-21 before they would beat Northwood 28-7. They would end the season beating Northridge 34-19 before then losing to Concord 45-28 in sectionals. You look at this season for Warsaw, they start back-to-back home games against Fort Wayne Snyder, as well as Fort Wayne Northrop. They then travel to Northwood. They come home for Mishawaka. They then travel to Wawasee. Back-to-back home games against Goshen and Plymouth. Then they end the season on the road at Concord and at Northridge on October 16th. So Bart Curtis in his 9th year at Warsaw. We call it Bart Ball. A lot of people call it Bart Ball. You can never overlook Warsaw. It's just like Notre Dame can never overlook Navy, just with how they run their offense, what they do, and everything that goes on with it. You can't overlook them because they will just beat you up, run it down your throat, run it down your throat, run it down your throat for the whole game. So you can never overlook Warsaw. They're always a tough game to play. But unfortunately, with no stats, that's kind of where I have to end the Warsaw preview. It's just unfortunate. I know we've had 2 teams last week. We had a couple teams the week before with no stats. I try and find them, max preps, and I just Google Warsaw stats, and I couldn't find them. So we just got to move on and continue with the Northwood Panthers. They come in from last season going 5-5 overall, 4-3 in conference. They did lose in the sectionals to Mishawaka 28-14. Now, this Northwood team scored 303 points, averaged 30.3 points per game. However, they gave up 233 points, averaged 23.3 points per game. Similar to Concord, their offense can score, so it's not as big of a deal, but when your offense struggles at times, your defense has to step up, and giving up 23 points per game, it's tough. Northwood last year started out losing to Columbia City 27-24. They then beat New Prairie 51-14. They started conference play with a 36-7 win at Wawasee. Lost a heartbreaker to Mishawaka 26-25. They then beat Northridge 22-21 in overtime before dropping to Concord 44-34. They beat Plymouth 41-14. Lost to Warsaw 28-7. They end the regular season beating Goshen 49-24 before losing to Mishawaka 28-14 in the sectional. Taking a look at this schedule for this year, they start at Columbia City August 21st. They then will host New Prairie and Warsaw to start conference play. They then travel to Plymouth and to Mishawaka before coming home for Wawasee. They then host Concord, travel to Northridge on October 9th, and then they end the season at home against Goshen on October 16th. Looking at some stats from last year, Monroe led the way passing 111 out of 151, 1,354 yards, a 73% completion rate, 150 yards per game, 10 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Monroe was also the leading ball carrier with 84 carries, 485 yards, 5.8 yards per carry, averaged 54 yards per game, and 7 touchdowns on the ground. Eash had more yards, however. He had 72 carries, 498 yards, 6.9 yards per carry. He averaged 50 yards a game and 4 touchdowns. You then have, I'm assuming, brother or cousin. You have B. Monroe as the quarterback. You have D. Monroe as the wide receiver. 44 receptions, 616 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Weaver had 27 receptions, 270 yards, and 1 touchdown. You flip it over to defense. Leitner led the way with 65 solo tackles, 18 assists for 83 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss. King had 55 solo tackles, 25 assists for 80 total tackles with 4 tackles for loss. You had E. Miller lead the way for the Panthers defense with 5 tackles for loss. Then you had 5 players with 4 tackles for loss. Garcia had 2 sacks to lead the way. Then you had Stump and Miller both with 1. D. Monroe had 2 interceptions. Then you had 4 players with 1. Team stats, passing wise, you had 132 out of 186 for 1,583 total yards, 71% completion rate, 11 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. Rushing wise, you had 315 carries, 2,198 yards, 7 yards per carry, 219 yards per game, 32 touchdowns on the ground. Defensively, you had 406 solo tackles, 119 assisted tackles for 525 total tackles, 40 tackles for a loss, 4 sacks, 6 interceptions, and 8 fumble recoveries. We now look at total losses for this Northwood Panthers team. They lose a good amount on offense. They lose more on defense, however. Offensively, you do bring back your lead quarterback in Monroe. You lose 19% of your total passes, so 35 of 186. You lose 14% of your yards, 229 of 1,583, and you're only losing 1 of 11 touchdowns. You do lose a good bit of carries. You lose 146 out of 315, 46%. You lose 1,030 yards out of 2,198, or 47%. And then you do lose 12 of 32, 37% of touchdowns. The big loss here is going to be Ish in the backfield. Receiving wise, you lose about half your receptions. So you do lose D. Monroe. That is the big loss for receiving wise. You lose 60 of 132 receptions, so 45%. You lose 743 yards out of 1,583 yards, 47%. And then you lose 7 of 11 touchdowns, or 64%. So total yards, you lose 1,799 out of 4,193, or 43% of total yards. And then you lose 114 out of 258, or 44% of points. Defensively is where they lose more on the defensive side. They lose 319 out of 525, or 61% of total tackles. They lose 7 of their top 10 tacklers. They lose 21 of 40, 52% of total tackles for loss. They don't lose any sacks. However, they only had 4 sacks. They lose 5 of 6 interceptions, 83%, and they lose 5 of 8 fumble recoveries, 63%. Your big losses, especially on the defensive side, you're losing Leck Leitner, you're losing King, so you're losing your top 2 tacklers for sure. Then offensively, you're losing each, but you do bring back your quarterback in Monroe. You bring back your second leading receiver in Weaver, and then you do bring back Miller, your leading tackle for loss. So it's kind of a scratch both ways. It's nothing like Concord, but also it's nothing like Mishawaka. So they're kind of in the middle there with their returning production. But you look at their schedule, they got Concord at home. They got Goshen at home. Mishawaka and Northridge at the respective places. Definitely tough. So it'll be an interesting year for Northwood. They went 5-5 overall last year. I could see them stepping it up, maybe going 6-4, getting one of those losses that they couldn't get last year with Monroe coming back another year. Maybe they pick off Columbia City instead of 27-24 loss. Maybe they flip it around. The Mishawaka game is going to be super tough. I think Mishawaka's potentially going to run away with this conference. That Northridge game is going to be interesting. The Concord game is the one I would circle with how much Concord lost. That one you could flip. So 6-4, 7-3 maybe, potentially. But it'll be definitely an interesting year in Napanee for the Northwood Panthers. Next up, we have the Plymouth Pilgrims. Last year, they went 4-7 overall, 3-4 in conference. They did lose in the sectionals. They scored 208 points last year, 18.9 points per game. However, they did give up 303 points last year, about 27.5 points per game. So definitely a little bit of a trend in the NLC Conference defensively. There are some struggles, but that is, to be understood when you have teams like Mishawaka, Concord last year, Warsaw, who likes to run the ball, Mishawaka, eat clock, Warsaw, eat clock, Concord, who just wanted to outscore everybody last year. But definitely something that is a little bit of a trend that I noticed going through all this. And we do have a first-year head coach, so we do have a couple of these in play. Obviously, you have Mishawaka's coach coming back, Concord's coach coming back, Warsaw's coach coming back, Northwood's coach coming back. And we talked a little bit about this last week. The top 4, all their coaches are coming back. All their coaches are long tenured coaches. I do think of all the coaches there, maybe Northwoods is the young. I don't want to say youngest, but he's in his 13th year. Nate Andrews, Concord's coach, is in his 12th year. So actually, Nate Andrews has been there longer than Kohler has been at uh, Concord. You have Bart at Warsaw. He's in his 9th year. So I'm just completely wrong with what I was thinking. And then you have Kinder in his 9th year. So Kinder and Bart are in their 9th year. Kohler's in his 12th year. And then Nate Andrews is in his 13th year. So I was completely wrong, but that is kind of still proving my point. You had the top 4 teams all keep their coaches. Plymouth, first year at Plymouth. It's, and I apologize if I mispronounce this. I don't think I'm mispronouncing it, but Brent Corbett, and is in his first year at the school. I believe this is his first year coaching overall. But you're also going to have a new coach at Northridge, a new coach at Goshen, and when we get to Wawasee, I do believe it's either a new coach or a coach that's been there for a year or two. I do have that on my little sheet that I prepare each and every week. But I believe it's his first year too. So the top 4, well-established coaches. The bottom 4, brand new coaches. It'll be interesting to see that dynamic at play all throughout the NLC Conference. But enough about that. That's, not talking about last year, this year, or anything like that. That's just a little tangent I went on. But Plymouth last year, as I said, 18.9 points per game scored, 27.5 points per game given up. They started with back-to-back losses against Tippecanoe Valley, 20-3, and Columbia City, 35-13. They then were able to win 3 straight, 24-21 against Northridge, 44-7 against Goshen, and a tough 21-20 win against Wawasee. They then lost 4 straight, Warsaw 42-14, Northwood 41-14, Mishawaka 28-0, and Concord 45-14 to end the regular season. Then they played South Bend, Washington in the sectionals. They beat them 44-23 before losing to Mishawaka 21-17. So a much tougher game. They made it the second time around, but still lost to Mishawaka in the sectionals. You look at this year upcoming for the Pilgrims. They are at Tippecanoe Valley to start the year, August 21st. They then host Lakeland. Follow that up with a trip to Mishawaka before coming home to face Northwood. They are then at Goshen. They host Northridge. At Warsaw before they end the year back-to-back weeks at home against Wawasee and Concord. Looking at last year's stats, Shively was their leading passer, 77 out of 137, 788 yards, 56 completion percentage rate, 71 yards per game, 5 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Home led the way on the ground, 231 carries, 1,269 yards, 5.5 yards per carry, 127 yards per game, and 13 touchdowns. Shively was their second leading rusher, 187 carries, 1,108 yards, 5.9 yards per carry, 101 yards per game, with 10 touchdowns. Fernando was their leading receiver by a lot. He had 34 receptions for 333 yards and 2 touchdowns. Flip it over to the defensive side. Coffin had 19 solo tackles, 73 assisted tackles, 92 total tackles with 2 tackles for loss. Cotton had 19 solo tackles, 41 assisted tackles, 60 total tackles, and 6 tackles for a loss. Cotton led the way with 6 tackles for a loss on the season, and then you had 6 players with 2 tackles for a loss. Then for sacks, Cotton and Berea led the way with 1 sack apiece. Then Berea and O'Leary had 2 interceptions apiece on the year. You look at team stats, we have 79 out of 140 for 831 yards, 56% completion rate, 5 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. On the ground, you had 475 carries, 2,580 yards, 5.4 yards per carry, 234 yards per game, and 23 touchdowns. You have 192 solo tackles, 479 assisted tackles, 671 total tackles, and 24 tackles for a loss. You only had 2 sacks, 6 interceptions, and 4 fumble recoveries. You look at what they're losing on offense, they're losing nothing passing wise. They lose 3 passes of 142%. Of those 3 passes, it was for 43 yards, so they lose 5% of their total yards, but they lose no touchdowns. So Shively is coming back for the Pilgrims this year. Rushing wise, you do lose Holm to graduation, so you're losing about half your production on the ground. So 245 of 475 carries, 51%. 1,322 of 2,580 carries, 51% of yards. And then 13 of 23, 56% of touchdowns. You do lose a lot receiving wise. You lose 57 of 79 total receptions, 72%. You lose 581 of 831 yards, 70%. And then you lose 4 of 5, 80% of touchdowns. So you do lose a lot of receptions, but you kind of add everything together, and you're actually losing a lot offensively for the Pilgrims. So you lose 2,107 of 2,580, or 82% of your total yards last year. And then you lose 102 of 168, or 61% of your total points last year. You kind of split it up. You lose half your carries. You lose a good chunk of receptions, but altogether, it does add up quite a bit. You flip it over to defense, you're losing your top 7 tacklers, 456 of 671, or 68% of your tackles from last year. You lose 79% of your tackles for loss, 19 of 24. You lose both sacks. You lose all 6 interceptions, and you lose all 4 fumble recoveries. So defensively, it's going to be looking like a brand new defense out there for first-year head coach Brent Corbett. And that's because you lose Coffin, Cotton, and Holm. However, you do bring back your quarterback in Shively, so that's still not nothing. It was a struggle last year for Plymouth, obviously, but you bring back your quarterback. I don't know if they plan to change systems. I don't know what they plan to do, but it's always a good thing to bring back your starting quarterback. and we are going to take another break, listen to a few words from our sponsors before we tackle the last three teams in the Northridge Raiders, the Goshen Redhawks, and the Wawasee Warriors. So we will be right back at the 574 Sports Report.
Courage Chiropractic and Wellness Center. When your body needs somebody to help.
Hello, I'm Dr. Karch, and I want to invite you to stop by my office on Cleveland Road in South Bend, just east of Portage Avenue. I've been serving Mishawaka for over 20 years, specializing in back pain, neck pain, headaches, naturally with gentle chiropractic care. Come see me for a free consultation.
Courage Chiropractic and Wellness Center. When your body needs somebody to help.
Voted the best pizza since 1969 in South Bend is Barnaby's on Jefferson Street. Our South Bend location stands out from all other Barnaby's because our pizza is made with the original recipe and baked in the original ovens. If you want the original Barnaby's taste, you've got to come to South Bend. Since opening in 1969, we've taken pride in the quality of the cheese, sausage, pepperoni, and fresh vegetables that we use on our pizzas. And Barnaby's has been voted best in the area from the South Bend Tribune 3 years straight. Order online at barnabys-pizza.com or call 574-288-4981.
And we are back at the 574 Sports Report. I'm your host, Drew Clauder, and we got three teams left in the NLC before we talk about predictions and everything there. Then I'm going to talk about the Logansport Berries, and then we'll wrap it up there, go over some things going forward. This is the last preview of the off season, so we'll go over just kind of things that are going to happen. Obviously, I already talked about the live podcast coming up on August 8th, not this upcoming Saturday, next Saturday. We'll talk about the format going forward and everything. If you like what you hear, if you like football, basketball, we are going to cover basketball and all other sports. If you have a friend or family member that likes high school football and then all that, I please ask you to share this with your family and friends. Like and follow, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, 574 Sports. You can find us on Facebook, 574 Sports Report. It's 574 Sports Report on YouTube as well. I appreciate everyone who has been supporting the channel. It has meant a lot to me, a lot to all of us here at broadcastsport.net. We wanted to get this back up and running. It was running. Believe it or not, 4 years ago was when we started this, and then things just kind of fell apart. Life happened, all that. But we got it back up and running now. We have sponsors. We have a better outline with what we want to do with this. So we appreciate everyone for listening, supporting us, watching us, wherever you're getting this. I know if you're watching this on YouTube, I did get a camera last week. You had Kenny and John. I did get a camera. However, I don't have the adapter I need to plug it into my computer. So that was ordered today because the camera just came in today. So we will have our next live podcast that will be on camera. But then the next time we're all together, I'm at my home setup. You will see my face, even though I do have the face for radio. With that being said, we will go ahead and continue the NLC as we will look at the Northridge Raiders. They are coming off a 3-8 overall season. They were 2-5 in conference. They did lose in sectionals. They scored 242 points on the season, 22 points per game. They gave up 242 points on the season, 22 points per game. So they were right at pretty much 500 points-wise. And as I said for Plymouth, brand new head coach this upcoming season for Northridge as Chad Epley does step down. You have Luke Amstutz coming in his first year at the school. He has 124 out of 52 in his 17th year overall, so he is an established head coach. So it'll be interesting to see what he can do with this Northridge Raider program, who not that long ago had pretty good runs, deep runs in sectional tournament, regional, semi-state. I believe one year I know they made it all the way to semi-state. I want to say they did make it all the way to state. We covered that game in 2021 when they lost to Mount Vernon, but you're talking a state title run. 2022, they made it to regionals, and then sectional championship, and then last couple of years just bowing out during sectionals. So this isn't a Northridge team without recent tournament success. So it'll be interesting to see what Amstutz can do with this Raiders team. We look at last year's schedule. They, as I said, 242 points scored, 242 points given up. They were right there points wise, but the points were distributed in different ways throughout the season. So they started the season with 6 straight losses. They lost to Fort Wayne Northside 21-7, Elkhart 17-7, Plymouth 24-21, Concord 21-14, Northwood 22-21 in overtime, and Mishawaka 35-20. You hear all those scores, and in reality, 2-score game against Northside, 2-score game against Elkhart, 3 points against Plymouth, 1 score against Concord, overtime 1-point loss against Northwood. Then you have 15 points against Mishawaka. So all these games within at least 2 scores. Obviously, the Mishawaka game, you have to score, go for 2, all that stuff. But all these games within 2 scores, they played everyone pretty hard for a majority of the season. They then pick up their first win at Wawasee 42-7. Pick up their second win against Goshen 49-21. They then fall to Warsaw 34-19 in their most lopsided game of the season to end the regular season. They then pick up another win against Wawasee 35-26 before they bow out to South Bend St. Joe in a tough 14-7 game. So other than the Warsaw game, and even the Warsaw game was 15 points. So Warsaw and Mishawaka 15 points. All games were within 2 scores. They weren't blown out. They weren't just run off the field. Each game they were in. So you just kind of have to understand one way, ball rolls one way, a missed catch off the fingertips. Instead it's an actual catch. Couple different things go Northridge's way. Instead of 3-8, maybe they're 8-3. We look at this year's schedule. They're at West Noble to start the year. They then come home to face Columbia City. They're then at Goshen. They host Wawasee and Concord back-to-back before they are at Plymouth and at Mishawaka. They then end the season back-to-back home games against Northwood and Warsaw. So you look at that schedule, the top 4 teams last year. They are at Mishawaka. They host Concord. They host Warsaw. They host Northwood. So 3 of the 4 games against the top 4 are at home. Obviously, you go to Mishawaka. That's a tough thing with what Mishawaka brings back. And then at Plymouth will be interesting. Goshen is on the bottom along with Wawasee. We'll cover them next, but your games are at Goshen, at Plymouth. Those are toss-up games right now, I would say, if you're Northridge. But you get 3 of the 4 top teams from last year's conference at home. Pretty good home-road split if you're a Raider fan. We'll look at some season stats. We'll start with passing. Rumfelt was their leading passer, 137 out of 250, 1,598 yards, 55 completion percentage rating, averaged 160 yards per game, 13 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Rumfelt was also the leading carrier with 84 carries, 376 yards, 4.5 yards per carry, 37.6 yards per game, and 6 touchdowns. Horn was the leading yards carrier. He had 80 carries, 393 yards, 4.9 yards per carry. He averaged 35.7 yards per game and 3 touchdowns. Copeland was the leading receiver with 53 receptions, 688 yards, 9 touchdowns. Horn was the second leading receiver, 35 receptions, 377 yards, and 2 touchdowns. You flip it over to defense. Granberg was the leading tackler, 54 solo tackles, 82 assisted for 136 total tackles with 6 tackles for a loss. Wagner was the second leading tackler, 44 solo, 44 assisted for 88 total tackles with 10 tackles for a loss. Wagner led the way in tackles for loss with 10, followed by Klain with 9. Klain led the way with sacks at 5, followed by Holmes with 2. You then had Norman with 2 interceptions and 3 players with 1 apiece. Team stats: 179 out of 336, 2,123 yards in the air, 53% completion, 23 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Rushing wise, you had 317 carries, 1,393 yards, 4.4 yards per carry, 126 yards per game, and 10 touchdowns. You then look at tackles. They had 288 solo tackles, 400 assisted tackles, 688 total tackles with 42 tackles for loss, 11 sacks, 5 interceptions, and 11 fumble recoveries. You look at what this team is losing to graduation, and it's, I would say, if we have kind of the range, it is in between Mishawaka and Northwood. Mishawaka brings back a whole lot offensively. Obviously, if you have been listening this far, you have listened to the Mishawaka one at the beginning. Northwood brings back a good amount. I would say Northridge is in between. They bring back the quarterback, and they did have 2 quarterbacks a little bit. Scholl was also a quarterback for them. He had 86 attempts for 500 yards. He did have 10 touchdowns of their 23, so it was a little different. He only played 6 games. Rumfelt played 10. Scholl was a freshman, so I don't know how it was split up, but you bring back both quarterbacks. So that is very big. You do lose Horn on the ground, which is a tough loss, but overall, you lose 43% of carries, 137 out of 317. You lose 47% of yards, 651 out of 1,393. And you lose 3 of 10 touchdowns, so 30% of touchdowns. But again, your leading rusher was Rumfelt with 84 carries. Horn did have more yards. Rumfelt had 4 more carries. I mean, to each their own, whichever one you want to pick as their main ball carrier, because 4 carries off, that's 17 yards off. But you do bring back Rumfelt as your quarterback. Scholl, if you want, as your quarterback, you bring both of those back. Receiving wise is pretty good. You lose Horn, who was your second leading receiver. But you only lose 26% of your receptions, 46 out of 179. You lose 24% of your yards, 505 out of 2,123. And then you're only losing 3 of 23 receiving touchdowns, 13%. So offensively, you're bringing back almost 70% of your total yards, and then almost 80% of your total points. You're losing 1,340 of 4,286 yards, and then you're losing 36 out of 210 points. So offensively, you do bring back a lot, which is big for their new head coach. Now, unlike Mishawaka, unlike Northwood, you flip it over to defense, and it's the same. So tackles, you lose 39% of your tackles. You lose 5 of your top 10 tacklers, which still hurts. But you're only losing 272 out of 688 total tackles. 39%. Tackles for loss. You're losing 15.5 out of 42, 37%. Sacks, you're losing 2.5 out of 11 for 23%. Not a lot of production, but pretty good production sack-wise overall. You're losing 1 of 5 interceptions. You're losing 4 of 11 fumble recoveries, 36%. Your big losses, you're losing Horn on offense, which running-wise, receiving-wise is big. Defensively, you're losing Wagner, which he was your second leading tackler. He led you in tackles for loss. And then he was tied for 4th with only 1 sack. But other than that, you're bringing back a lot of other defensive players. So this Northridge team, brand new head coach. So far, Mishawaka brings back pretty much everything offensively. Plymouth, we kind of just quickly run down everything. Plymouth does lose a lot offensively, about 50% of their carries, 70% of their receptions, 82% overall. They lose a lot defensively. You think about Northwood, the other kind of, I'll say, dark horse. They do bring back offensively their quarterback, but they lose half their running game, half their receptions. They lose over half their defense. And then Concord loses everything. Northridge could be a sneaky team with their schedule. As I said, it's tough that you get at Mishawaka, but you get 3 of the 4 top teams from last year at home. Watch out for the Raiders this year. They could have something to say before all is said and done of the NLC Conference. Next up for the NLC is going to be the Goshen Redhawks. They come in last year 2-8 overall, 1-6 in the conference. They did lose in the sectionals. They scored 144 points, 14.4 points per game. However, they gave up 387 points, 38.7 points per game. So definitely a tough year in Goshen for the Red Hawks. And as I said before, the bottom 4 teams all bringing back, not bringing back, all bringing in new head coaches. Griffin Heckerman is the new Goshen head coach. First year at the school. According to John Harrell, first year overall, does not have a record. So 3 of the 4 teams so far that I'm covering right now, new head coaches. 2 of the 4 brand new head coaches. Northridge brings a head coach with experience. So that's why I said watch out for Northridge, because yes, a new head coach, but a head coach with experience, and not only with experience, good experience. So could be interesting. But Goshen, Griffin Heckerman coming in this year. Tough year last year for Goshen as well for all these teams. But you look at the schedule for Goshen last year. They started out with a tough loss to Fairfield, 30-23. They bounced back with a 38-21 win against Washington. They then lose 37-7 to Warsaw, 44-7 to Plymouth, 59-0 to Mishawaka, before they pick up their second win, 24-15 against Wawasee. Then they lose 42-0 against Concord, 49-21 against Northridge, 49-24 against Northwood, before they bow out in the sectionals, 41-0 to Fort Wayne Northside. So you look at this year's schedule for Goshen, and it's a little reworked, but it's obviously conference play is going to be all the same teams. They start August 21st at home against Angola, August 28th at home against Washington. They start conference play September 4th against Northridge at home. Then they are at Concord, at home against Plymouth, at Warsaw, at Wawasee. Then they host Mishawaka before they travel October 16th, last game of the regular season, at Northwood. So you look at your splits. You host Northridge at home, you host Plymouth at home, and Mishawaka at home. Not bad 3 to host. However, you travel to Concord, travel to Warsaw, travel to Northwood. So could have been a better split for Goshen, but it's not too bad for a first-year head coach. Stats last year, Diaz led the way passing, 178 out of 284, 1,552 yards, 62% completion rate, 155 yards per game, 13 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Diaz was also the main ball carrier. Goshen did not run a lot, and that's where I think they really struggled and why teams were able to limit Goshen offensively. Diaz led the way, 97 carries, 241 yards, 2.5 yards per carry, 24 yards per game with 3 touchdowns. So when your leading rusher is averaging 24 yards a game, that is not a recipe for success. Jay Miller had 41 carries for 122 yards, 3 yards per carry, 12 yards per game, and 1 touchdown. Goshen did, however, have the season leader for receiving in the NLC. Elliott had 89 receptions for 876 yards and 7 touchdowns. You follow that up with Rapp with 39 receptions, 390 yards, and 4 touchdowns. You flip it over, and Elliott was your leading tackler with 43 solo tackles, 39 assisted, 82 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss. Mishler was your second leading tackler, 26 solo tackles, 38 assisted, 64 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss. Amon was your leader with 4.5 tackles for loss, followed by Wyatt with 4. Herrera had 1 sack to lead the way. Then you had Miller and Clevenger with half a sack apiece. Then you had Diaz, Elliott, and Kreider all with 1 interception. So you look at team stats, 186 out of 299 passing yards, 1,726 that's 186 out of 299 completions, 1,726 passing yards, 62% completion rate, 15 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 226 carries, 629 yards, 2.8 yards per carry, 63 yards per game, 4 touchdowns. You then have on the other side of the ball defensively, you have 286 solo tackles, 233 assisted tackles, 519 total tackles with 20.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 3 interceptions, 9 fumble recoveries. So definitely a tough year at Goshen. But you look at what they're losing offensively, they bring a lot back. However, it is the old adage that I talked about last year. If you're bringing a lot back from offense or defense that wasn't great, wasn't able to do a whole lot, you will see some growth, but will it be substantial growth? That is always the big question. But you're pretty much bringing everything back passing wise for Goshen. Diaz comes back as the quarterback, obviously. He was a junior, so he'll be a senior next year. Rushing wise, you do bring back Diaz. You bring back Miller, so your 2 ball carriers you bring back. Again, 63 yards per game. They averaged 172 yards per game passing, so they bring back not a lot of offense because they didn't have a lot of offense to begin with. But you bring back majority of your carries. You're only losing 23. So you're losing Rapp at 39 receptions. You're also losing Mishler at 22 receptions. So in reality, you're losing 7 for 43%. You're losing 782 of 1,723, or 45% of your total receiving yards, and then 8 of 15 touchdowns for 53%. It's tough. You're losing your big receivers, but overall, offensively, you lose 1,072 yards out of 3,222. So you're only losing 33% of your total yards. You lose 48 of 120 points, only 40% of those. So you do bring back a good amount offensively. Now the question is, can the new head coach get this offense to work? Defensively, it's the same. You're only losing 199 out of 519 total tackles. You're losing 4 of your top 10 tacklers, but you do bring back your top tackler in Elliott. So you also bring back your top receiver in Elliott. That is big. The Diaz-Elliott connection is there. You do lose Mishler. You do lose Kreider. So you'll have to figure out replacements there. But you only lose 4.5 of 20.5, 22% of tackles for loss. Not that they got to the quarterback a lot. They only had 2 sacks. You lose half a sack. So you bring back 75% of your sacks. You lose 1 interception for 33%, 1 of 3. And then you lose 2 of 9 fumble recoveries for 22%. So you bring back a lot offensively. You bring back a lot defensively. The question just becomes, can you make your returners work for you? And that is a big question for Heckman. First year head coach, brings back a lot, brings back your quarterback, like I said with Plymouth. It's always nice to bring back your quarterback, but you have to figure out how you can make it work. Because this schedule, as I already talked about, it balances out not terribly. You have Mishawaka at home. That's going to be a really tough game for them. I'm just going to be honest. Northridge at home, going to be a little easier game potentially. But Plymouth, you have to find your wins where you can if you're this Goshen team under first year head coach. And then the last team we are going to cover in the NLC is going to be the Wawasee Warriors. They are coming in from a 1-9 season overall, 0-7 in the conference. They did lose in sectionals. They scored 146 points on the season, 14.6 points per game. However, they did give up 328 points on the season, or 32.8 points per game. So you look at last year's schedule, it was a tough year. Their one win, and I say this as an alum, was against Jimtown opening week, 10-9. Hard fought win, rode high into next week, and then they struggled from there on out. West Noble 35-19, Northwood 36-7, Warsaw 41-7, Plymouth 21-20, Goshen 24-15, Northridge 42-7, Concord 49-21. Ended the regular season at Mishawaka 36-14 before losing to Northridge 35-26. Definitely a tough year for Wawasee. They bring in new head coach, and I know I'm going to mispronounce this. I have been practicing this one, and I've come up with 3 different ways to say it. So I'm just going to pick the first way. If I mispronounce it, please let me know. I have no qualms. A lot of people throughout my life have always mispronounced my last name, so I definitely understand how it feels. It's not great, but Mark Osmolowski is how I'm going to say it. I'm probably just going to call him Mark. I'll be honest. Much easier, but definitely a tough year ahead for Wawasee from last year. You look at this year's schedule. They start out at Jimtown, August 21st. They then have back-to-back home games against West Noble, and then they start conference against Concord. They are then at Northridge, home against Warsaw. At Northwood, home against Goshen. At Plymouth, they end the regular season home against Mishawaka. So they're split right now in conference, home away, home away, home away, home. You look at the teams they get at home: Mishawaka, Goshen, Warsaw, Concord. So they get 2 of the top 4 teams from last year at home. They do have to travel to Northwood. I think the tough game, they have to travel to Northridge. Again, I've already talked about Northridge. I think they're going to be the sneaky team this year. But not terrible splits. It's nice to go home away, home away. it's tough when you have, one home game, then you have 2 or 3 away games before your next home game. So having that home away split is pretty nice as a former player myself. Passing wise, on the season stats, Zachary, they kind of used two quarterbacks. I'm not sure what the splits entirely were. One quarterback really played 10 games, the other quarterback played 4 games, similar to Northridge, however, less passing. Zachary was the leading passer, 21 to 44, 309 yards, 48% completion rate, 31 yards per game, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Haynes, the other quarterback, went 12 of 26, 249 yards, 46 completion rate, 62 yards per game, 1 touchdown, 5 interceptions. So, not sure what the split was, but those were the 2 main quarterbacks. Rushing wise, McKibben led the way with 80 carries, 276 yards, 3.5 yards per carry, 30 yards per game, 1 touchdown. Center led the way yards wise. He had 69 carries, 319 yards, 4.6 yards per carry, 32 yards per game, 1 touchdown. Center was also their leading receiver, 9 receptions, 170 yards, 2 touchdowns. Andrew was not far behind him, 6 receptions, 168 yards, 2 touchdowns as well. You flip it over to the defensive side. Pena led the way with 39 solo tackles, 20 assisted tackles, 59 total tackles, 5 tackles for a loss. Brown had 27 solo tackles, 20 assisted tackles for 44 total tackles, and 5 tackles for a loss. Andrew led the way with 10 tackles for a loss, while Morrison had 6. Both Morrison and Andrew had 2 tackles, or 2 sacks, excuse me. And then you had 4 players with 1 interception apiece. Team stats, they were 36 of 78 completions for 646 yards, 46 completion percentage, 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. 404 carries, 1,682 yards, 4.2 yards per carry, 168 yards per game, and 10 total touchdowns. 326 solo tackles, 130 assisted tackles, 456 total tackles, and 50 tackles for a loss. You had 8 sacks, 4 interceptions, and 8 fumble recoveries. Total losses on the season, 6% of passing, 5 of 78 completions, 13 of 646 yards, so only 2% of yards, and then 14% of touchdowns, 1 of 7. They bring back both their main quarterbacks, I'll say. Their main loss on offense is going to be center. Running, rushing, receiving. They're losing 27% of rushing, 111 out of 404 carries, 449 out of 1,682 yards, or 27% of their yards, and then only 1 of 10 touchdowns. Receiving wise, 10 of 36, or 28% of receptions, 167 out of 646, or 23% of total yards. They are then losing 2 of 7, 29% of touchdowns, both from center. So overall, they're losing 937 of 3,189 yards, 29% of their total yards, 24 of 126 points, or 19 total points. So again, like I've been saying, they do bring a lot back offensively. However, the question is, with a brand new head coach, how much can they grow? How much can they do what can they do with all this production coming back when there wasn't a ton of production from last year. Defensively, they bring back about 65% of their tackles. They only lose 4 of their top 10 tacklers, 161 of 456, so they lose 35%. They lose 18 of 50 tackles for a loss, 36%. They do lose 5 of 8 sacks, 62%, but they lose no interceptions, and they lose 2 of 8, 25% of fumble recoveries. Their big losses are center on offense, running the ball, receiving the ball, and then Morrison on defense. He was all over the place defensively for them. Tackles for loss, sacks. He had an interception. So it'll be interesting to see what they can do again under first year head coach Mark. Just going to leave it at Mark. I do apologize. If you are listening to the podcast, if you get shared this, appreciate it. I do apologize for your last name, but I'm just going to keep it at Mark. So there is the NLC preview. I think it's safe to say that Mishawaka is by far the favorite of this with how much they have coming back offensively. As I said in their preview, they do lose a good, like half their defense, pretty much. So they have to fill those holes, but they bring back pretty much everything offensively, other than their receptions, but they don't pass the ball much. Concord, on the flip side, loses everything offensively. So it'll be interesting to see what they can figure out offensively. They lose a lot defensively as well. Warsaw, unfortunately, I have no stats. I do believe they were heavy on the seniors side. So I don't know what they have. Northwood, they bring back their quarterback. They lose half their running game in Esh. They lose a good amount on defense. All 4 of those teams bring back their head coach. They know what they want to do. They know what they can do. They know what their team is. That is a huge plus. Obviously, summer workouts, all that is figuring out what this team is, but being there for as long as they've been, 9 years is the lowest. You know what you have on JV. You know what you had on freshmen. You know what you have coming back. They know what this team is. Plymouth, Northridge, Goshen, Wawasee, new coaches. They have to figure out what their team is, who their players are, what they want to do with their players, what scheme they want to run, all that stuff. That is where they miss out. Plymouth, they have a decent amount coming back offensively. They do lose a lot on the ground. They bring back their quarterback. They lose a lot defensively. Goshen, they bring back a lot offensively. They bring back a good amount defensively. Wawasee, same thing. Again, if you bring back a lot on teams that just weren't as productive, how much substantial growth can you have? I think the biggest upriser, the biggest dark horse, the biggest surprise, whatever you want to call this, is going to be Northridge this year. They bring back so much offensively. They lose a little bit on the ground with Horn, but they bring back offense, they bring back defense, and yes, they have a brand new coach, but they have an established coach coming in for them, unlike Goshen, unlike Plymouth, unlike Wawasee. Luke Amstutz, 17 years in coaching. He's made it to he's coming from Angola his first couple of years. He's currently coming from East Noble, his last coaching stop, but he led them to a semi-state. He led them to sectionals. So he is an established coach with a team that has a lot of starters coming back. So I think personally that game at Mishawaka, October 2nd, could be for the conference. I think Concord has to figure out what they're going to be offensively because of how much they lose. I think Northwood has to figure out what they're going to do on the ground with how much they lost and defensively. So those unknowns, can they figure it out? Absolutely they can. I'm not discrediting that their coaches can't figure it out. Warsaw is the unknown, obviously, because we don't have stats. But I think Mishawaka is the leader right now, and Northridge is the dark horse. There's definitely no question about it. So you have your questionable teams and Concord, Northwood. I'll put Northridge in there as well, and Warsaw because we don't know what they have. And like the NIC, the NLC has the number one right now in Mishawaka. And that Mishawaka Penn game, number one versus number one, however you want to say it, backyard brawl is how most people will say it. August 28th, it's going to be standing room only. Absolutely no question about it. We're going to take one more quick break. I know we're going on almost 2 hours, but we're going to talk about the Logansport Berries, and then we'll sign off. I'll talk about quickly what you can expect, and we'll call it a night. So we'll be right back here at 574 Sports Report.
Lake. Make sure want to taste of Chicago? Well, bring it on down to Digsy Dogs and Grill with locations in Hudson Lake. Make sure to try their Chicago dog and their Italian beef, plus much, much more. Have a sweet tooth? Check out the large selection of ice cream products, including shakes and more. Digsy Dogs is located at 8310 700 North in Hudson Lake and is open 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Central Time. That's Digsy Dogs and Grill. Want to taste of
High school sports promote lifelong memories and longtime friends. Publicity in all media, including podcasts like this one, is an important part of encouraging young people to participate in athletics. The Logansport High School class of 1962 is happy to be a part of this podcast, and we wish the best to athletes in every high school sport. Enjoy your time with your coaches and friends. It only happens once in your lifetime.
Welcome back to the 574 Sports Report. I'm your host, Drew Clawiter, and we're going to talk about our last team in our previews. It's been a lot of work for me to cover just the three conferences and to add Logansport, but it was a lot of fun, a lot of time spent, and it's amazing to think that we're just 24, 25 days away from the high school football season. But let's get to it. We're going to talk about the Logansport Berries. They're coming off a really good season of their own, 8-4 overall, 2-2 in conference. They were third in the Hoosier Big School Conference. You take a look at that conference. Western won at 3-1, 8-4 overall. Hamilton Heights was second, 2-2, 4-6 overall. Logansport was third, 2-2, 8-4 overall. Twin Lakes was fourth, 2-2, 10-3 overall. West Lafayette finished fifth, 1-3 in conference, 3-7 overall. Some stat leaders. You look at Dold from Twin Lakes, 2,653, and this is both big school and small school. So that's where we're at with these stats. But Cooper Dold, 2,653 passing yards. Rushing yards, you have Levi Shoemaker with 1,538 from Western. Receiving yards, you have Ethan Need from Twin Lakes, 891. Total touchdowns, you have Elliot Baldini from Logansport with 18 total touchdowns. You have Matthew Walters from Twin Lakes with 160 total tackles. You have Lauren Taylor from Logansport with 9 sacks. Ledger Schaefer leads the way for the conference with 7 interceptions. So you take a look at Logansport. They scored 447 points last year, 37.3 points per game. They gave up 250, 20.8 points per game. You look at their schedule last year, they started out on fire. Peru win 48-0. Adams 54-6. LCCHS 49-17. Benton Central 61-6. Twin Lakes 45-28. They then stumbled against Hamilton Heights 22-14. A thriller against West Lafayette. They win 44-43 in overtime before they stumble back to back against Western 35-34 and at Rensselaer 36-35. So they went 3 straight weeks, 1 point overtime, 1 point loss, 1 point loss in overtime. And then they beat West Lafayette 1 point overtime win. But 3 straight tough emotional games. They then beat Huntington North 15-12. They then beat Muncie Central 31-24 before they lose to Lebanon 21-17 in the sectional championship. So the Rensselaer Central game was the last regular season game. Huntington North and Muncie Central were both sectional games. But you look at the schedule this year for Troy Hudson in his second year at the school. He is at Peru August 21st. They then come to South Bend Adams. We are going to cover that game at School Field for broadcastsport.net. Then they go home to host Hamilton Heights. They are then at Lafayette Central Catholic, at West Lafayette. They host Tipton. They host Western. They are then at Culver Academy before they round out their season at home against Twin Lakes. Looking at some stats from last year, you have their leading quarterback. They're not as run heavy as Mishawaka or Warsaw, but they are very run heavy. But was 53 of 107 passing wise for 820 yards, 49% completion rate, 68 yards per game, 14 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Rushing wise, Baldini led the way, 192 carries, 1,431 yards, 7.5 yards per carry, 130 yards per game, and 15 touchdowns. Jackson was the second leading rusher with 87 carries, 689 yards, 7.9 yards per carry, 57 yards per game, and 7 touchdowns. Receiving wise, Jackson was the leading receiver with 13 receptions for 275 yards and 3 touchdowns. You followed that up with, if you guessed Baldini, you are correct, with 13 receptions, 218 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So their leading rusher was their second leading receiver, their leading receiver, their second leading rusher. You flip it over to the defensive side. K. Jackson, so Q Jackson was offense. K. Jackson is the leading tackler, 38 solo tackles, 74 assists for 112 total tackles, 15 tackles for a loss. Wicker was second leader in tackles, 11 solo, 53 assists, 70 total tackles, 1 tackle for a loss. You have both Taylor and K. Jackson with 15 tackles for a loss. Hudson was the second on the team, however you want to count it, with 10. Taylor led the way with 9 sacks. K. Jackson was second with 5. Then you have K. Jackson with 5 interceptions. You have Q. Jackson and Rozzy with 2 interceptions. So you look at team stats, passing wise, it was pretty much all her. You had a couple throws from other people, but 54 out of 111 for 855 yards, 14 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. So without her, you had 1 completion, you had 4 passes for 35 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Rushing wise, they carried the ball 442 times for 3,296 yards, 7.5 yards per carry. They averaged 275 yards per game and 38 touchdowns. Defensively, they had 248 solo tackles, 463 assists, 748 total tackles, 86 tackles for a loss. 86. They lived in the backfield. On top of their 86 tackles for a loss, 36 sacks, 14 interceptions, and 11 fumble recoveries. They caused chaos both in the backfield and on the turnovers. You now look at this team, what they have coming back, what they're losing. They're losing, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they're losing a 3-year starting quarterback in her. He was 96% of their passes, 820 of 855 yards, and all their touchdowns in the air. As I said, they don't run the ball, or they don't pass the ball a whole lot. They pass it a decent amount, but they are more a running team. But they do have to find a new quarterback now. Her was a 3-year starter, I believe, possibly a 4-year. I could be mistaken, but he was their quarterback for a long while. We've covered them a couple times, and I can't remember the last time we weren't calling her under center. So it's definitely going to be a loss. However, this is a running team. Logansport fans know that. They only lose 2% of their carries, 12 of 442. So they bring back 98% of their total carries from last year. Now, I wasn't quite sure how to do this because it was actually really interesting to me. They rushed for 3,296 yards, and they are only losing negative 12 yards. I know, it's kind of weird. They're losing 2 senior runners. They're losing Morak, who had 1 carry for 2 yards. However, they are losing her, who had 11 carries for negative 14 yards. So, don't really know how to promote that percentage-wise. So, they're technically bringing back more yards than... Yeah, I don't know how to talk about that percentage-wise, but they're only losing negative 12 yards. Now, her is still a big loss. Don't get me wrong with that. But when you're bringing back 98% of your carries, they're only losing 3 of 38 touchdowns. So they're bringing 92% of their touchdowns back. And yes, you guessed that correctly. Her had 3 touchdowns. Negative 14 yards, 3 touchdowns on the ground. Don't know how to explain it, but that's what happened. But they are set up very well offensively with how they run their offense. Now, receptions-wise, they still bring a lot back. They're only losing 14 of 54 receptions, so 26% of receptions, 221 out of 855 yards, 26% of yards, 3 of 14 receiving touchdowns, 21% of touchdowns. They're losing Hippolyte, their tight end, who was a big player on defense. And then they're losing Taylor, which is it's a big loss on the defensive side for sure. I don't want to say it's not a big loss on the offensive side, but definitely a huge loss on the different defensive side. But that's it of what they're losing. So they're losing 255 of 5,006 yards, 5%. They bring back 95% of their offense. And they're losing 30 of 330, 9% of their total points. So 95% of their offense, 91% of their points are coming back from a team that just went 8-4 overall and 2-2 in their conference and scored 37 points per game. That offense, if they figure out the right quarterback, has the potential to be electric with Baldini in his senior year, in Walker his senior year, in Jackson his senior year. So all their big players are going to be seniors. I talked about how Concord did their thing. I've talked about how Knox did their thing. Their senior class that built up the program, I think that's where Logansport is right now. This senior class coming up, if they can figure out the quarterback, this senior class has a chance to do something special for the Logansport Berries because you bring back your top 5, 6, 7 ball carriers. Obviously, Baldini's the main one, but you bring back pretty much all your running game. You bring back most of your receiving game, which again they don't throw the ball a lot, but you bring back a lot. Now, again, like I said with Mishawaka, like I said with Northwood, I wish there was a stat for offensive linemen because I can be saying all this and they could have to be replacing all 5 starters on the offensive line. Not saying if they'd have to, they can't, but if they were returning all 5 starters, I would be saying Logansport should potentially win the conference. I didn't do the research on the conference outside of where the other teams ranked last year and all that. But if I had any inclination about the offensive line, Logansport, you could be doing something special this year and potentially playing in Lucas Oil Stadium. Now, you have a tough sectional for sure. Regionals could be interesting. Semi-state is anyone's guess. But this could be a special year for the Logansport Berries. You flip it over on defense. This is where I said it's a bigger loss. You're losing 31% of your tackles. You're losing your top 3, or you're losing 3 of the top 10 tacklers. So you're losing 236 out of 748 tackles. Not that bad, but you lose Taylor. That is the big one. You lose Hippolyte. That is another big one. And this is just from what I remember when we were getting ready for the Adams game, when we were getting ready to do games for Logansport. This is what I remember. You lose 29 of 86 tackles for loss, 34% tackle for loss. Taylor was your leader at 15, tied with Jackson, who's a freshman. Sack-wise, you lose 14 of 36, 39% of your sacks. Taylor, your leader, at 9. Interceptions, you lose 2 of 14, only 14%. And then you lose 4 of 11 fumble recoveries, 36%. Your big losses are her, your quarterback, Hippolyte, and Taylor defensively. Hippolyte offensively also your tight end. But Taylor, a big defensive loss. But, I mean, the amount you bring back offensively and defensively, I don't want to discredit what you bring back defensively as well. I mean, your leading tackler was a freshman with 112 tackles. You also bring back your second leading tackler. You just lose your play caller, I believe, in Taylor. You lose Hippolyte. So you have to figure out who's going to replace some of your key players. But this is gearing up to be something special for Logansport for sure. Just like it is for Mishawaka. Just like it is, potentially another run for Penn or potentially Elkhart as a dark horse, St. Joe as a dark horse, but definitely bring back enough to have the people in Berryland excited for this season as they should be. So with that is our previews. We covered a lot of teams. We covered 3 conferences plus Logansport. But I don't know about you guys. I am absolutely ready for football. It can't come fast enough. I am ready to watch it, talk about it, listen to it. I just need it. I've been watching old football games on YouTube just to get a little football in my life. It is so close, yet so far, but I appreciate everyone listening. I appreciate everyone sharing, commenting, following us on socials, everything. We really appreciate it. This has been a crazy 3 weeks doing everything myself with getting the previews together and all that, but it's been fantastic. Our next podcast is not going to be next Wednesday. It's going to be next Saturday, August 8th. That is when our live podcast is going to be. It's going to be at Digsy Dogs and Grill. We're going to figure out a time. I have to get with John and Kenny, figure out a time. We're going to do our schedule release. We're going to do talking about what we have upcoming this season. We're hoping to get some guests. We're hoping to get people on to talk. And then we're going to just we're hoping people show up. We want to hear from you guys, but we're excited for that. And then it's going to still be a weekly show. We don't know if we're going to do it live each and every week or if it's going to be recorded like these previews. That's still up for debate, but it is going to be covering a couple teams from the INSC, a couple teams for the NISC. We're going to do overall previews of each conference each week. The game from the previous Friday, game they have upcoming. We might have guests. We might have people come on. It's all kind of fluid, but we're really excited for what we have upcoming for sure this season. We can't wait for the season to start. I'm so excited for where this podcast can go. I hope you guys are too. I hope you follow along each and every week. But I've taken up 2 hours of your time now. I hope you guys have a fantastic week. Stay cool, stay refreshed. Football's right around the corner. Everyone have a great week. I'll see you August 8th for our live podcast. So long, everybody.